Welcome to another edition of Dissecting Horror on Dread Central. This is your virtual panel series where we talk to the most prominent up-and-comers in horror. We talk about films that are being released and aspects of the filmmaking industry as it relates specifically to horror, our beloved genre. We got something really new for you all this evening. We're not here talking about a specific film. We are here with four incredibly talented costume designers. So for the first time ever, we're doing a Dissecting Horror panel about costumes. So I'm excited. It's an aspect of horror filmmaking that you can't help but notice, but it's one that I don't know a lot about and I'm anxious to learn about. The panelists here, let me tell you, they've worked on some of the most amazing horror movies that we've all seen and that we all love. And you're gonna be really excited when I tell you who all has done what up here on this panel. So let me introduce everyone briefly before we really get to know everyone and do some deep dives. We're here with Laura Montgomery. Welcome, Laura.
Hi.
Laura worked on What We Do in the Shadows Season 3, Spiral from the Book of Saw, which just came out recently. Small Town Murder Songs, When Moses Wakes, and Cooper's Christmas. But we can't wait to talk to her, especially about Spiral, since it's still in the theaters and we still have, we're still reeling in how awesome it was. Can't wait to talk about Chris Rock, Detective Zeke Banks, and the style you gave him, along with some of the costumes you've got right in the background there. So really glad you're here, Laura. So glad to have you. We're also joined by Avery Plewes. Hi, Avery.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. You very recently worked on Ready or Not, which is a huge hit. It came out a few years ago, but we're still talking about it all the time, as well as, which I can't wait to talk about. We were talking about during the tech check before we went live about Fairuza Balk and you know, some really cool stuff. So maybe we'll circle back around on that. We are also joined by Mary Claire Hannan. How are you, Mary Claire?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm so stoked to have you here. One of your first projects ever was Reservoir Dogs, which is so cool. And talk about iconic and memorable costumes. We're gonna have to talk us some black suits in a little bit, but I mean, you also worked on Urban Legend and Red Eye with Wes Craven. He's a horror legend. So super, super exciting. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It is our pleasure. And last but not least, Whitney Ann Adams from New York. She worked on Freaky, Happy Death Day to You. So really into the Blumhouse scene over there. And she also worked on Piercing in the Eyes of My Mother. Those films are connected by the director, so it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about that. That definitely gets so you got mainstream horror, you got indie horror, you've been doing all kinds of horror. Welcome, Whitney. So glad you're here. So glad all of you are here. Like I said, you know, in the intro here, and like I told you all in the tech check, you know, I'm a little nervous, frankly. You know, not only have we never done a panel about costumes, but you know, you guys have all done such great stuff, and I'm just, you know, even though I'm the moderator, I also feel like I'm here just to learn and to kind of like let you guys explain this aspect of filmmaking that is new to me. You know, obviously costuming is so important. It's one of the first things people see in a film, but we don't really know, at least I don't know a lot about that. You know, you did Freaky and Happy Death Day, both Blumhouse films. Excuse me, Happy Death Day to You. Want to make sure I give you your proper credits. How great is it to have worked on several Blumhouse projects?
Super fun. I love working with them. We've had such a blast. And, you know, I will follow Chris Landon anywhere. I just finished my third movie with him. I'm about to go do my fourth. So I'll just do anything with that guy.
Yeah, you know, we love the films that Blumhouse puts out. We love the fact that they constantly remain really timely. And, you know, even during a pandemic, they were just delivering great films, you know, whether it was through Hulu or direct to VOD. So, yeah, we love those guys at Blumhouse too. Thank you so much for being here. Laura, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, how you came into, specifically how you came into costume design.
Hi. So costume design for me, first of all, Whitney, I was not a horror fan. I was the really scared kid. I think I was even too afraid. I'm embarrassed to admit, but if you remember Silver Bullet, starring the two Coreys,
Oh yeah, great
um,
one.
I watched that at a sleepover with my back to the television.
It's intense, especially if you're a kid. I mean,
Uh,
I don't think that's embarrassing at all.
I mean, I wanted to see the Coreys, but I was like, oh, I don't know if I can handle the
Oh
horror.
goodness, the
Um,
Coreys.
Costume for me was one of those things where I kind of, you know, as a quarter life crisis, I finally accepted that this thing that had always been my passion and my hobby that I kind of really took for granted and never thought it could be a career because it was so strange and unreliable. And it's just, this thing that I always do. And then as I started working a little bit more and volunteering a bit more in short films and in theater, I realized, oh, like, actually, this is a career. People do this for their lives and for money. And so it built up that way. And so I continued on with um, Toronto has a great scene for film festivals and lots of, on the fly short film festivals. You shoot it in 24 hours, you cut it in 24 hours. And so we have this great, with the Canadian Film Center, we have a great community as well. And so we just kind of built up, um, I just built up my career through working. And now Hollywood North, there's a lot of production that shoots here.
Yeah, there is. Well, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I can't wait to come back and talk a little bit more about your most recent. Mary Claire, introduce yourself and tell us how you got into the field of costume design.
In my early 20s, I left and took off to Europe. I lived in Paris for several years with a fashion designer, and was working a lot on the fashion shows, the Défilé de la Mode, etc. And it was really exciting and fascinating, but I always wanted to give it a story, right? Like, why are we always going for just beauty, right? Like, why isn't she holding a bag of groceries walking down that ramp, right? Or why isn't she, pregnant? And, I always wanted to give it something else. So I left Paris and came to Los Angeles to pursue a very simple dream, never thinking I'd be a costume designer. I just wanted to be part of the theater, part of film, and just worked really hard and was lucky enough to meet Quentin Tarantino after a couple of years. I mean, he was a kid like me, and he was trying to make a movie, Reservoir Dogs, and it wasn't paying very much, and I didn't care because I was just always a person that just followed my passions. I wasn't in a mindset of being a responsible or where's this going to get me. It was always just like, just do it and you'll get by, somehow it'll be okay, and
Wonderful.
so from there, it just kind of snowballed.
That's wonderful. What I love is, I haven't forgotten you, Avery, but I love about how everyone so far, in some way, it's like just doing what you love, and it became a career. I mean, that's living the dream. Y'all living the dream. Avery, was it the same for you, where just started? You've just been doing costume design, and then realized you could make a career of it?
I mean, I wanted to be a fashion designer when I was younger, and my whole life I've been, drawing what I thought people should wear. And I moved to New York when I was 18 and did a fashion internship, and I thought that was my route. And then I came home after my visa expired, and I had a friend who was doing a short film, and his costume designer just dropped out, and I had just moved back, and he was like, oh, you'd be great. And it was a 1940s film noir, and I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but sure. I didn't know what continuity was. They had to teach me about blood and all that stuff, but I did it. And then it was sort of during the time when IOTC 873, our Lauren, my local, was having a boom, and so I applied as a permit. And my first sort of day on set, I was like, oh, this is like so cool. This is so different from fashion, because it's like I'm making something with the director and I have to talk to makeup. Like it was, I've always been the type of person that like really just like wants all of my friends to get together and make something cool, and film kind of is just like that every day.
Sure is.
And so I started working as a permit in IATSE and working as a costume assistant, but I went to a high school that was like a performing arts high school in Toronto. And most of the people I went to high school with were working as production designers or producers on like low budget, nothing things. But on the weekends, I had a couple friends that were producing, and I emailed them and I was like, I'll do anything, like whatever you have, I'll do. And so I just built up my resume that way. And then the people who had no money on those projects eventually got bigger projects. And my first feature I designed went to South by Southwest. That was with someone I'd met on a short. And so it just kind of organically snowballed. But it was
Fantastic.
fashion was always really, really hard for me for some reason. And then when I got into costume, it just felt so natural. It's hard. I don't know how to explain.
No, I mean, and that's really interesting too, because you draw a very clear distinction between fashion and costume, and it makes me realize how different the two are. But for somebody who doesn't really know, it could kind of seem like all part of the same basket. So that is really interesting.
Organization is also what I love about costume. You have to be really organized, and that's like it's
nice. Well, one thing you said during Tech Check, Avery, that it was too good not to circle back to. You were saying something about how your agent told you early on that it would be good for your career to have a horror movie credit.
Yeah, so my first agent, I signed with them when I think I only had one feature under my belt. And the line producer that I was working with was with them, and he recommended me to them. And he said the next thing I really needed to do was horror, because I didn't have a very big resume. It would prove to producers and directors that I would understand continuity, because if your continuity is not correct costume wise in a horror film, you can ruin the entire movie. You'd have to, and also doing horror, you have to manage a budget really well because you need so many multiples. It can be very costly if you pick a very expensive item that you have to multiply. And so doing horror in his eyes was a great way to prove that you were a capable costume designer, which I would agree with.
That is just so great to hear as a horror fan, and as a horror fan who came of age in the 1980s, horror's always kind of been the like, if you work in horror, you're going to ruin your career. But then hearing there's this part of the industry where they're like, no, work in horror, because that proves that you've got the shit that it takes to, and I just love the fact that horror is such a wonderful training ground of a genre, for costume designers. But that's just so great. And you mentioned continuity, and Laura, we were talking about continuity in Spiral. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about both of those costumes behind you, and then let's talk about continuity in Spiral.
Yeah, so these two costumes, this is the Jigsaw 2.0, the new Jigsaw costume for the Jigsaw character, who is in different iterations the killer in all of the Saw movies. And so this being from the Book of Saw, there's a Jigsaw type of character. And so it was a bit of a reimagination, because we knew it would be somebody different wearing the costume, but I still had to stick with, it's a hooded coat, and it had to fit over a pig mask. So there were a lot of logistical, even just the fact of designing a hood that covers an enormous mask, because a prosthetic mask to fit over a human head, it actually adds a lot of size, like in all the directions. The height, it had these floppy ears, which when I saw the head, I was like, oh, those ears are like way higher than I thought they would be. And the snout kind of sticks out. So you really have to work with the director and the DP or the cinematographer to figure out, how deep the hood is going to be so that they can shoot this pig from the side. And, you're maybe going to catch like a sliver of the snout. So the hood has to be deep enough. But then a person has to wear it too. So it can't look like some sort of ridiculously oversized hood.
Right.
And it was the same coat being worn for both. And so knowing that this was a new person, I kept the same vernacular of black hooded coat with red lining, but updated it as to the person who is going to be wearing it. So this Spiral is out in theaters. I hope you've all seen it because get ready.
I have. Loved
Uh,
it.
it is the gorgeous Max Minghella, who is our Jigsaw. And so knowing that, I was like, okay, he's young, he's kind of hip. He's the one he really loved the sweatshirt idea underneath because he spends a lot
Nice.
of time in the movie without the coat, but in the underneath bits, it's a cargo pant, it's a sneaker boot, it's a sweatshirt. It's really practical. So he's doing things like, he's building the traps. And so I kind of had to think something that you were touching on before, Whitney, about like, where do these people get the clothes? So, okay, he works during the day as a police detective. I guess he spends all night building these traps. Is he like, who's made these clothes for him? Has he gotten someone to sew them for him? How has he designed something that he wants to wear based on his interests? So I started thinking about his interests, and I've mentioned in other interviews, it was things like, maybe BDSM. He obviously likes to torture people. So there is some Japanese rope bondage lacing down the sleeve.
Wow.
Some interesting details, like just a little, we had to make a cowl at the neck to hide because the pig mask would have just otherwise sat on the neck of the sweatshirt. So I had to make something that would cover the transition between the mask and the rest of the costume. So I did this, it's like a cowl and has a zipper in the back. So it hides it, but it also had, at the time, there were a lot of those like Black Bloc and the Antifa protests were happening. So it had this kind of, it was before COVID, so nobody was wearing a mask per se,
Right.
but people were wearing bandanas for, for the tear gas. So it had that kind of subversive element to it. And yeah, with the kind of the grommet details, a little bit of fashion too. I did some of that Margiela stitching on the magnets, and then on the back, I don't know if I can turn them around. There's a lacing detail up down the back. The original title of the spiral was called the organ donor, because every package he sends is different organs, like he's cutting different organs out of the body.
Right.
And so I use some of that information for the color palette. Like I wanted kind of gross organy colors like bile, liver. And this was to mimic the detail of a spine, like an exposed spine going down the back.
Wow.
So that's that guy. And then Avery, something else you were saying about horror that I thought, and there's the little like kind of hand-drawn spiral. Another thing I think is really interesting with costume and horror is that often horror movies are really, the timeline is compressed. It happens like the killer's not like, I'm going to kill you over a period of 2 months. Like, no, I'm killing you today. So you kind of have one shot to really nail the character. Like they're not wearing a lot of clothes. They have maybe 1 or 2 changes. And so you really have to distill like who this person is in 1 or 2 costumes. And I think there's a knack to doing that. And that is another great thing about horror movies and costumes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm literally in awe hearing about all the details that went into that cloak, that it really tells a story in and of itself, and how you really put yourself in his shoes. You went into the mind of a serial killer, like these mine hunter detectives. That's just amazing, hearing your creative process. Thank you so much for delving into that. Similarly, Whitney, you created a really iconic look in Freaky with this awesome red leather jacket. Where did you get that idea, and what was it like bringing that look to fruition?
That was definitely the hardest costume in the movie, to figure out what the balance was going to be. In the script, it was a dress, which Chris and I in the beginning were like, that's not going to work. We have so many stunts. Again, like Laura was saying, this is the one look that the butcher in Millie's body gets. And so what is it going to be? How does it sort of break down over the course of the movie? So it had to make sense story-wise too. The butcher hates everything in Millie's closet because it's all sort of grandma sweaters and hand-me-downs. And so then he goes over to Char's room, Millie's sister. She's a police officer, but then Kristen and I are like, she likes to go clubbing to let off steam in the evenings. And so she's got some interesting like club wear and, leather, and that's where the black bodysuit that she wears underneath it comes from. And that's where the leather jacket comes from, is that trying to figure out what Char would have in her closet. And also, what does a man sort of gravitate, this serial killer, what does he gravitate towards to? Probably these looser denim pants that had more of an androgynous, no gendered look, and it was also very like strong line. So it was something that he would gravitate towards because that's what he's wearing in his day-to-day life. So it had to make sense both to the butcher himself and what is actually in the house. And also the leather jacket, the whole outfit had to be a certain price point because they don't have a ton of money. You know, Shar has a police officer salary, and the whole family is just sort of trying to save money. And so the jacket actually came from Amazon. I tried all sorts of jackets from, you know, different places and high end, low end, but that was just the one that was perfect. And it was, you know, like $150. You know, it's real leather, but it was not crazy expensive. So maybe she saved a few paychecks to get that. You know, we even took some photos of her and Millie with Shar wearing that jacket and some family photos that are around the house.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, one more thing I want to ask you for I mix it up again. Yeah, I'm curious, you know, like I said before, you directed Happy Death Day to You, the sequel. I made sure to you know, emphasize as a sequel. How is it coming into a film to do a sequel? Was it more difficult or less difficult knowing that the film already had an aesthetic before you came to the franchise?
It was definitely a mixture of both. I mean, there were some things that were already like the killer had the killer look, but then, you know, you've seen the second movie, there's multiple people playing the killer in the second movie. And so needing multiples of the same thing was really tough, especially because the first one was made on such a tight budget. A lot of the things came from Target or Massimo, and a lot of lower end things that were way out of season a year and a half later. So trying to find multiples, just scouring the internet and the earth, I found the shoes on, you know, other countries, and just trying to get enough for the right, you know, sizes that I needed was really difficult. And then the biggest thing was that the whole movie took place on the same day as the first movie. So we had to match every single background actor. And everyone, you know, us costume designers know that a lot of them bring their own clothes, or, you know, we don't have those in, you know, what they're wearing in stock. So I had to take pictures, screenshots of every single frame of the movie, figuring out, okay, we need to find someone with this color shirt, and then tell people what to bring very specifically. And then I had to go shopping for all of those dupes to try to like match perfectly.
That sounds like a Herculean task.
It was really hard, but we did it.
Wow. Fantastic. Fantastic. Mary Claire, the time has come. Let's talk about black suits. Was that your idea for Reservoir Dogs, or was that
that was Quentin? You know, he came from that whole, you know, but we actually questioned him because for us, again, it's the story behind. It's not just a fashion item. Yes, it became a fashion item, right? His style, Quentin's style has become fashion just out of classic elements of clothing, right?
Right.
But when we were putting them all in black suits, it was like, why are we doing this? And he was basically saying, it's like the FBI, you know, when they're in the room, you know who your other guy is, so you're not going to kill your other guy that's just dressed like you, right?
Interesting.
Right. So that was right, and that was the story behind that look, right? The look was slick, and he loved that look.
That's fascinating. Yeah, because the look really is iconic. It's so interesting to know that it was more than just a fashion statement, because I mean, black suits became huge. Wow.
Fashion in movies, when something becomes a fashion statement after a movie's made, it's in the context in which it was done. And, you know, often it is really just classic elements of clothing, right, that become a fashion because of the kind of movie, right? Like, right, because of what the movie's done. And then it resonates with an audience, you know, like Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction with the white blouse and the black pants, right? Would never be a fashion, but people are reminded of that story. So, but anyway, the idea was, yes, like guys, FBI guys that wear those jackets that say FBI, you know that guy's an FBI guy, so don't hit him, right?
Right, yeah.
That there really was a sense behind it. It wasn't just look for no reason, you know?
I love that. Well, you know, it has to have helped somewhat that, you know, blood wouldn't show up on black suits, because that, you know, then you get into this continuity which Avery mentioned before. But I'm curious, talking about continuity, because you do have that character who's bleeding on the floor the whole time, and was it shot chronologically so you could just keep adding blood, or did you have to go back and forth, a little blood, a lot of blood, a little blood?
So here's the defense in the producer that says you have to have a horror film, because Reservoir Dogs was not horror, right? But we had a lot of blood, and we had $10,000 budget.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Right? So here's the trick. Besides the fact that we have a brilliant guy who we didn't know at the time was brilliant, he was just some other guy that wanted to make a movie. You could actually say, is he taking his jacket off in the scene or not? Okay, because I can't afford a long sleeve. It'll just be a short sleeve, right? Okay, we did stuff like that. But the real trick was black is black on camera. And we needed many black jackets.
Mm-hmm.
And we needed it stylized, right? Like, because they're kind of like a 60s, they're cool looking.
Very.
I went to thrift stores, Jet Rag, around Hollywood, Aardvarks, Jet Rag, and found black jackets, right? Then you buy a bag of buttons, because even if all the jackets are different fabric, black is black on camera. You buy a bag of buttons that are all the same. So up close, you're gonna read the button, not the black jacket. You're gonna think it's the same black jacket. Some jackets had 3 buttonholes. Some black jackets had 2 buttonholes. We're gonna make them all 3 buttons. So you just lift it up, tailor the lapel. So that's how each jacket was like $2.50.
Wow.
Because you tricked, you think more about what does the camera actually see? There's your multiples. Talk to the camera, right?
Y'all are geniuses.
Is a master class. Everyone, like anyone costume program, just bookmark this little section of Mary Claire talking, whatever the time code is, and this needs to be part of the curriculum.
For real.
So to learn how to do films or right, do low budget films, do independent low budget films, and then you've learned how to make movies, right?
Amazing.
That's right?
Yes. Everyone should be making horror movies. Everyone should be making low budget horror movies. Y'all are going to turn into a bunch of geniuses like these women I have here with me today.
It reminds me of doing Eyes of My Mother.
Please.
My entire costume budget was $3,000. That was my first feature. And we were all, in the woods in the middle of nowhere. And it was, a period movie. But we had luckily not too many characters, but still the whole movie took place over 6 months and needed a lot of costumes. And for $3,000, it was quite a challenge, but I came in $10 over budget. So I did okay.
Nice. This is so fun. We do have some questions coming in. Hold your horses, people, because I have a few more questions I want to ask you guys before I open it up. This is just so exciting. Mary Claire, you also did Urban Legend in 1998, right? Mm-hmm. That movie really, like, at the time, it seemed to kind of get lost amid all the Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer movies, but definitely more than I Know What You Did Last Summer, I see Urban Legend just really has a lot of momentum these days. Like it's become like a genuine phenomenon. So I just thought it'd be fun to talk about it a little bit. And also, did you see recently that Jared Leto was pretending he couldn't even remember did you see that? He did this interview and he was like, what are you talking about? I didn't do a movie. So I got to know, what was it like, at the time? Are you surprised that the film has had, such an enduring legacy? And what's up with Jared Leto?
Jared Leto was, trust me, the girls remember Jared Leto, right? In Toronto, we shot it, right? He remembers, right? And it was wonderful for me. It was a really huge learning curve because I was trained by Quentin how to shoot film, and that's just play. You just do what you feel, and he says he likes it or he doesn't, or maybe he'll change something or he won't, or that gave him an idea, he's going to go home and rewrite something or whatever. It just becomes, it's really natural and it's not judgmental. And it's just really easy, and you just have fun and you play. And Urban Legend was, there were a lot of executives that needed to see storyboards. Okay, what's a storyboard? We didn't work that way, right? So I had
Sure.
to learn to be right. And so it was I had to grow up and learn that there's a lot of money involved. This is a studio, it's not Camp Tarantino. And, but my approach was a very natural approach. I like Jared Leto wore like a military jacket. I wanted it to be political and controversial and sort of give it a certain level of depth. The producers were going for a really iconic horror film look, sexy girls screaming, running down hallways. So that's where and then they hired the girl that just did Tarantino stuff. And my approach was really kind of street fashion, stylized street fashion. So I had to learn to understand what they want. It's their film, and put girls in tight, you know what I'm saying? So it was kind of really good for me to experience the studio and to experience there's different ways of making movies. And I love that film very much, Urban Legend. And I love the characters in it. And, but it was a different school. And so it helped me grow up, and it helped me be able to move ahead with my career and learn how to present storyboards and options and, things like that.
What I love about these stories is, between Reservoir Dogs and Urban Legend, both of these stories, one's a indie and one's a big budget mainstream film, but in both cases you were able to achieve while learning the ropes, which I just think is fantastic. That you just had the opportunity to prove yourself in the heat of battle. That's awesome. One of the other characters in Urban Legend that we all love to talk about is, Robert Englund, the professor. I mean, did knowing that you had Freddy Krueger, who had this horror icon status, how did that influence your look for him?
Well, I mean, you meet these iconic characters, and as you go in our careers, the best thing you could do is, first of all, always be at the mercy of your work, and don't read people's press, because you really need an actor in the room, not a celebrity, right? So I don't go there. I just meet the man, and I talk to him. And
that's awesome.
And we extrapolate from where he wants to go with this, how he wants to look. Does he want to be a sloppy professor or an uptight professor, or, and we it becomes a creative arena. But I think it's really important not to get into that other world of.
Oh, that's great. Because, it seems like a different costume designer would have been totally tempted to give him like a green and white sweater vest, or green and red sweater vest or something, But you were like, no, I'm not going to let that influence me. I'm going to just think about the character. So that's great.
Comes into the room when he comes into the room, and what are you feeling? Just like what did you feel when you read the script? The momentum. What color did you see? What was the momentum? What was the tone? And that's what you're trying to get at. So that's where you come to it. But then his energy, how he comes into the room and how he stands and how he feels, it's very important to just pick up on all of that, because whatever's out there in press and in persona can really jar our creative abilities.
Absolutely. You're so interesting, Mary Claire. I love this. I do want to pivot back over to Whitney real quick. We talked about Freaky, we talked about Happy Death Day to You, but you also did costume design for The Eyes of My Mother and Piercing, both written and directed by, I believe, Nicholas Pesce. Am I pronouncing his last name correctly?
We usually say Pesce, but he goes by Pesce.
Pesce. Okay. Well,
yeah.
First of all, what I love about that is it shows, how your career is all the way on the spectrum too, from these mainstream Blumhouse flicks to these really dark art house flicks. But one of the things that occurred to me is, The Eyes of My Mother is in black and white. And does that just change everything when you're a costume designer? I mean, is that its own beast?
Yes, that was quite a challenge. And also that was the first movie I designed myself. I went from assisting on The Great Gatsby to then, you know, where we had millions of dollars to a $3,000 budget in black and white. It was like completely the opposite. And so I took my phone, my trusty iPhone, into every store that I went into and put it on black and white mode and just saw what the texture looked like. It was, black and white is all about texture. And so, and contrasting fabrics and patterns. And so you're really playing with pattern and how the light's going to hit it. So something bright yellow looks totally drab in black and white. Like the main dress that Francisca wears is bright yellow, but it looks very drab on purpose. And, you know, and she's sitting having dinner, and there's a lace detail that looks like eyeballs, which I really like. So, you know, digging through every single thrift store I could find, you know, cheap things, but that felt right. And I love Nick so much, and, you know, getting to 2 movies back to back with him, I can't wait to do another one in the future. He's just so collaborative and so much fun. I mean, making horror films is a blast. It's hard work, but we had the most fun on those 2 projects, and I'm really proud of piercing. I mean, half of the clothes in that were built from scratch. I mean, getting to custom make gimp suits and you know, all sorts of different things. Like I made Mia's second costume myself. I made 8 multiples because we had, you know, a limited budget, and they luckily gave me a huge amount of money in comparison to the whole budget of the movie to do those clothes. And it took place over, you know, a 24-hour period. So not that many clothes, but you need multiples. And we had to do this very specific Armani 80s suit, like the American Gigolo vibe. And then we had to get that made, and we had it made by the guy who made Jordan Belfort's suits and all of Leo's suits for, you know, The Wolf of Wall Street. So getting the person who made those suits was really important. So it cost a certain amount of money, but, you know, that's when it's worth it. And I had to, you know, lobby to my excellent producers who knew I was gonna, you know, use the money well, and I'm grateful that they trusted me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I want to pivot back over to Avery, because God, there's so much I want to talk about. It's like, which do I act first? Let's talk about the craft legacy first, because, you know, I personally thought it was great. And, you know, spoiler alert, the ending, you know, kind of reveals that it's not a reboot, it's actually a sequel. And you know, Fairuza Balk, you know, so many of us in horror just really love her and everything she does. What was it like working on that? And you had some interesting stories about Fairuza.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely daunting to take on such an iconic movie, especially for costumes that kind of influenced the zeitgeist in such a way, and, you know, so many of my friends. But it was, I mean, that making that movie, something that I've like learned the more I do this is like any project I go onto with the goal of just enjoying the process is usually those are the projects that I love the most end result of, because you just get lost in the filmmaking. And that was sort of that project. Like the cinematographer, the production designer, the producers, the director, all the coven and I were all still really close friends. It was Zoe Lister-Jones hired a predominantly female crew.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like we had sort of this coven that we were, you know, making the craft together within. And actually one of my best friends from high school, Zoe hired as the witch consultant. So like someone I watched with as a teenager, we like hung out on set together, and it was just like so cool for her to like see me do my job and her consult with Zoe on the rituals. But Fairuza was really cool. I couldn't tell anyone that she was in it, like not my boyfriend, no one, because I had signed an NDA. And I had to fly to LA to fit her because we were filming in LA, and so I had to essentially go to this secret fitting. And she's wonderful, you know, she's super cool and everything you'd hope for and more. And we had like a suite at a hotel, and she came in and I had like a whole rack, and the robe she wears in it is custom made. And I had it made for her, and she loved it and she thought it was beautiful. And I, you know, had brought everything under the sun for this one fitting, and we figured out her outfit in about, you know, 10 minutes. And then we just hung out and talked for 45 minutes. And it was one of those kind of magical memories associated with the job that, you know, I'll cherish forever.
I love hearing when celebrities are actually cool. You know, it's like, it's so heartening.
It's sort of what Mary Claire said. It's like, you know, there are so many people that we have all, I think, worked with where we hear a reputation or like, oh no, they're going to be awful. And it's like 9 times out of 10, you just treat them like a normal human being and approach them with the proper energy. And they're just like, they just want to make a good product together. And that's, I think, what it comes down to.
That
and
is
Plewes
awesome.
Find a little piece of their, you know, to find their humanity.
Yeah.
That's what we do in costume design.
Yeah.
We find
And-
humanity,
Yeah.
right? Right.
And the psychology too. Like with Fruza, I had this, like, I decided I needed to get this ring for her. And each of the girls in the Craft Legacy, I designed them based on their element. And in you know, the esoteric arts, as they call witchcraft now, you know, it's fire, air, water, earth, and then the universe. And so I wanted to get something for Fruza, like we had decided she would be the universe. So I found a moldvite ring, which is like from a meteorite, and I brought that to the fitting. And then also she wears a pearl ring, which represents water, because Lily, her daughter in the movie, is water. And she just like loved the attention to detail, and that she had been thought about, and there was thoughtfulness. And I think a lot of our job is just being thoughtful people and considerate. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes a long way. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, it has come to the time where I'm going to start giving you guys some questions from the viewers. I just want to let you know, Darren Lynn Bozeman, director of Spiral, stopped by to say hey. So, you know, he's showing support to Laura, and we appreciate Darren coming by. We all love Spiral. So yeah, let's bust it out to some of these great questions that we're getting from viewers. Starting off with one for you, Laura. Did Alex Kavanaugh, who did many of the Saw films, give you any advice for Spiral?
She did. She gave me a lot of advice. One of, I think, her best pieces of advice was to keep everything, which is how I have these 2 costumes. She said that they like to get rid of things, and she ran into a big challenge between Saw 2 and Saw 3. On Saw 2, not a lot of money. The costumes in Saw 2 were not expensive initially, and then for whatever reason after Saw 2, I guess, you know, at the time you don't anticipate necessarily there are going to be 7, 8 sequels. They were auctioned off. Cut to next year, they're making Saw 3, and they need those exact same costumes again, and they don't have them. And so she was in the position of having to recreate them now at, you know, 10 times the price, because I think at that point she had the means to build them, because that was the only way to really kind of match what they were. And I think that mistake was not made once. So at the end, I had the liberty to say, you know, the costumes were going to be kept in kind of a safe place. And I suggested that I could safeguard some of them as well.
Yeah, I mean, and they look great, you know, displayed there. Fantastic, fantastic. Here is a question for, God, there's so many great ones to choose from here. Avery, someone says, we loved the look of Ready or Not. What was your favorite look of that film?
Grace's dress, 100%. It was actually, I was thinking of when Mary Claire was talking about the suits and Reservoir Dogs. I designed that dress in 5 parts. It's not a dress, it's a shirt, it's a corset, it's a skirt, and it's a sash, because they couldn't understand why it was so expensive to multiply so many wedding dresses. So what I did was I created a spreadsheet and dissected every single thing that would happen to different parts of the costume, and then we would rebuild it in that way. But I think it's such a, like, the way the dress unravels, you know, when I got the job, I was basically told the wedding dress is a character in the movie, so no pressure. So yeah, I would say.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, what a great look. Definitely an iconic look. Here's one for you, Whitney. How many pairs of Alan Ruck's costume did you have to have for the scene in Freaky when he gets sawed in half?
Well, I was prepared with about 15. I had about 15 multiples, but you know, there were multiple dummies because multiple things happened to him. He also had a stunt double, and then we had the body that split in half. Luckily, that was just one. We only did that one time. It was so good. It was so gross that our DP, Lori, who's the best, literally screamed when we did it. Luckily, it was MOS, like we didn't do it with sound. So it was just so horrifying. We're like, okay, we did it. That was it. So we only needed one, but the blood literally got everywhere. But I had about 15 because you just never know what's going to happen and you need to, you know, have enough. Luckily, in that one, I could. It was not an expensive costume. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. Here's one for you, Mary Claire. Basically, it's asking if you have a process for designing killers, specifically with the Mary Claire for Urban Legend. Like, you know, how did you come up with that costume, and how much of that was you know directly because it was something you pushed for versus something that the director told you they wanted?
Well, here's a tip for young costume designers. That's how I got the job. Was I was in a room being interviewed with like 3 or 4 people, and they said, "So, what is the jacket? You know, we see this dark hooded guy or creature walking, right?" And I said, you know, boom, 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 the most ordinary jacket I can find. And one of the producers was like, "What? You're not going to create," like they thought I was going to create a Darth Vader thing. And I was like, no, because that's not where horror is. Horror is in catching us, right? So we need to be able to not see just a jacket like a parka that they wear in cold weather that we would never assume. And that's, you know, that's the whole magic of horror, right? Was that we think we're at ease, that we know that guy. Oh, just another student walking, you know, down the hallway, and it's really a killer. So it was like something at the time. We used to shop a lot at Army Navy stores, right? And so the director said she's hired, because it had actually thrown the producers, because they thought, you know, I would come up with some brilliant thing. And really, sometimes it's the ordinary that is extraordinary, right? Especially in something like horror, where you have to grab your audience, right? You have to put them at ease so you can get hold of them, crush them. You know what I mean?
Yes,
right?
Love it.
So you have to give it that ease, right? So that was the whole point of that.
That's fantastic. Back over to you, Laura. Someone wanted to hear you talk about how you made the style in Spiral more noir than other Saw movies. Can you talk about what you did to give Spiral sort of a unique look, and what some of your inspirations were?
Yeah, of course. So for Spiral, for the noir vibe, I mean, it was definitely not a period piece. So I was careful to have all of the actual clothes be contemporary. So everything was purchased or rented. It was all, you know, not brand new, but within the past, you know, 10, 20 years ish, depending on the age of the person or the character. To give it the noir vibe, I controlled the color palette really carefully. So I mentioned before, kind of referencing the like bodily fluids as colors, but then also keeping to a really noir palette, knowing that a lot of those movies were black and white, but even just kind of what we think of as a mid-century palette. So of course there's a lot of black because it's a horror movie, it's a Saw movie, grays, dark teals, ochre, forest green. And then in terms of the styling, for our leads, I kept it very simple. And then I went a little bit more, I pushed the style a little bit more on some of the supporting characters who we didn't have to see as much. if that makes sense, because I didn't want it to be too distracting. It's supposed to be still naturalistic. So some of the other police detectives in the office, you have a guy who, he was like our 3-piece suit guy. So he's wearing, he's got his jacket off, you see his vest, which is something that, you know, it's just that little nod, especially in the set that we used was an existing, it's been a government office and it's been used as a lot of different sets and movies, but it had a lot of beautiful dark toned wood. So the blues against the dark toned wood really popped. I was careful with ties. It was mostly guys. So I was really careful with the ties in terms of the texture, not having anything too shiny. Everything was kind of matte, more like a knit texture. The patterns on the ties, I tried to find contemporary ties that had like a 50s shape and pattern to them, like a really small foulard print or something that was a nod to that period.
That's awesome. It's neat that she put so much thought into it. I guess I shouldn't be surprised hearing that, you know, the cloak behind you is actually a coded novel, basically. But no, it's just really fascinating. Here's a question that came in.
All costumes are, but I think it's good if you just feel it, it's subliminal. Because if you think about it, as people, everyone makes, you know, you've chosen your glasses and your shirt and everything is really curated, but I just perceive it as you. And the same with these characters, it's storytelling. We're creating these people who have to feel, well, depending on the project, but usually they have to feel like believable and real, especially in horror, as Mary Claire said, for you to buy into it. So we don't want you to notice these things, but
I mean, that's one of the ironies about costume design and other aspects of filming, like editing and composing. Sometimes when they're done really well, you don't notice them at all. You know, so often I'll be like, did that film even have a soundtrack? And then, yeah, it did. It just fit it so perfectly that I never realized I was, you know, being pulled out of reality. But no, that's fantastic.
You know, it's such a seduction. The
It
subtle.
really is.
Yes, it's very important, I think, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, here, a question came in for one of you, but I think it's too good not to ask all of you. And I want to hear all of your responses. I'm just going to go around. What would be a dream project for you to do costume design for, Avery?
Oh, that's so hard. You know what? I was actually thinking about this the other day because I always write, like, I have a goal book and I write like the types of projects I want to do. And it's more of a feeling, like then my dream project is to work with a director where like the collaboration is so good and exciting. It doesn't matter who it is or what the genre is. It's kind of a boring answer, but it's for me, I
know we want you to say like a horror set in outer space with no, I'm kidding.
So yes, that, but I really want to work with radio silence again. Like the guys who did Ready or Not, trying to, but our schedules just have not been aligning, but that's on my list. Like I would go to the ends of the earth for those guys.
So basically anything radio silence works on, that's a dream project for you.
That's a goal to do next, but I just want to work with people that I like, get really excited about things, and they meet my energy with the level of like excitement. And I mean
that's integral.
Doing is like a dream project, but I can't talk about it. But yes. So.
Right on. Whitney, what would be a dream project for you?
For me, there's kind of a couple different answers here. One, I'm so lucky to have worked with two amazing directors who I will literally follow and do anything with because they're that dream collaborator for me. I mean, that's Chris Landon, that's Nicholas Pesh. They're just two people who I find really special and amazing in my life. And we have the same creative energies, and then we have a shorthand, and it's not work, it's playtime. It's so much fun. So anything that they do, I'm immediately going to say yes. And then there's a huge part of me that wants to do like a big mid-century movie musical. Be great if it was horror themed, but I would love musicals. I would love to do that. But even just like a mid-century sort of crime drama or sort of true crime kind of vibe would be, I love the 50s and 60s, so I'd love to do something in there.
Nice. Mary Claire, what would be a dream project for you?
You know, I'm so crazy in love with this business. You know, I can't believe my fire hasn't been put out, not for a second. So to me, they're all dream projects. You step into it and you have to fall in love with it. You have to make love to it when you work, right? That's the only way, you know what I mean? You can, you really attach yourself to it. I love horror. I love all kinds of films. I love social anthropology. I love, people of different walks of life that I would never have been able to have met, unless I had been a filmmaker. I love biographies. I love, I love it all. You find a piece of yourself in every film you do, and that's how you move it forward and create. And it's just, I don't know, it's just a dream business. I absolutely love it.
Wow, that's awesome. Your passion is really infectious. It's really, really cool. Really cool. Laura, what about you? Dream project?
I mean, I agree with all of these ladies that it's really about the collaboration. And I mean, I would be remiss not to give a shout out to Darren, who I've worked with twice, Darren Lynn Bousman, the director of Spiral, who is amazing to work with and so collaborative. And a lot of it, I think part of why we enjoy this line of work is that it's always something different. We're doing a period movie, we're doing a fantasy, we're doing all kinds of different stories. And so we get to I love all the different pieces of research, like really going down a Mennonite rabbit hole and then something completely different. In terms of stories, I find I'm interested these days in mostly consuming stories about women in general, stories that reflect my own experience. I think I would love, there was this great, I hope I'm saying the name of both the author and the book correctly. I think the author was Mark Sakamoto, and I believe the book was called Forgiveness. And it was this beautiful story of, he's Japanese Canadian like me, and it was the story of his grandparents. One set of grandparents, his Japanese grandparents, who had survived concentration camps in Canada, and then the other set who were his other grandfather was a World War II veteran, and kind of how they came together through his parents' marriage and formed a really beautiful friendship and love for each other after the war. And so I've always really wanted to, there hasn't been a lot put out about the Japanese Canadian experience. And so I'd love to be a part of anything that tells that story.
Yeah, we'd love to see you do it. That's fantastic. Well, it's time for me to start thinking about wrapping up with some final comments from y'all. But before I do that, Mary Claire, I'd be killed if I didn't ask you about what it was like to work with horror legend Wes Craven, who you did the costume design for Red Eye, and Red Eye is one of those sleeper films that people who return to it are just so riveted by it.
He's just a really lovely man and super quiet, and calm. And so you'd go maybe sit down next to him and just kind of have a soft conversation. And he would give you more of a feeling or, a tone of how he wanted her to look or how the killer was. So he's not being exact. That's our job, to go in there with the fabric and the colors but he, so he was really a gem to work for, a little bit shy. So
we in the horror world still miss him every day and love him so much. So yeah, like I said, I think I would have been, our readers would have had some words for me if I didn't ask you about that. So thank you very much.
A very kind man and very respectful and lovely.
Oh, wonderful to hear. You're going to make me cheer up. But it is time. Our hour has come to an end. Before I let you all go, though, I want to go around one last time and hear what you're working on next, because now that you've made a bunch of new fans, we want to be able to keep our eyes out on your work specifically. Whitney, you're working on the new Paranormal Activity movie, yeah?
I just finished it. So I just got back home. So I'm still catching up on my sleep. It was pretty crazy. I don't think anyone is going to expect what we're going to give them. And it's very,
I can't wait.
Can't wait for everyone to see it, next year.
Cool. Anything else you're going to be diving into now that that's done?
Yeah, I'm actually leaving in a few days to go to New Orleans and do my next Chris Landon project. So
Nice.
can't wait.
Oh man, we can't wait to hear what's going on. We can't wait to hear about all these things you got kicking, because it just sounds fantastic. Avery, what are you working on now?
I just finished a 1980s Christmas movie for HBO Max.
Okay.
And I'm about to do a mini series for Netflix, but I'm not allowed to talk about it.
Oh, sometimes that's just as exciting as you're hearing details, because now we're just wondering. I can't wait to hear back from you.
A lot of research, which I love. Like, that's one of my favorite parts, is like getting into the minds of people, and it's real people, so it's cool.
Fantastic. Well, you'll have to keep us in the loop, please. Thank you. Laura, what are you working on?
Well, we just finished the 3rd season of What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, I wish we could have had more time to talk about that too, because the fashion in that is so cool. It's so goth. It's so outdated, yet somehow acceptable as contemporary. Oh, I'm so glad to check that out.
I'm in the office right now. If I could just flip this camera around.
Oh, it's so tempting. We got to wrap things up, but we'll have to have you back to talk more about it.
Yeah, so that will be coming out on FX. I'm not sure what the air date is, but we just finished shooting, and it is it's really funny.
Oh wow, I can't wait to check that out. And whatever you're working on next, be sure to let Jordan know. He'll let us know, because you made a lot of fans over here. And folks should still check out Spiral while it's in theaters. It was great to see it on the big screen safely, social distancing with the mask and everything. I want y'all to be safe. I'm not trying to tell people what to do in a pandemic, but Spiral's a great film. It was great to see it on a big screen. So
yeah,
there you go.
to everyone who went out and saw it.
Yes, everyone who's seen it, most everyone I know has really loved it. Mary Claire, it's so great having you here. You know, your career has been just really amazing. You know, start to finish. What are you working on next?
Well, there's a little bit of smoke in there in the wind for some horror stuff.
Ooh, we like that.
Doing August, September, but you know, it's nothing solid yet. So, you know, until we're on the truck, we're not on the job yet. So I don't really want to say anything yet.
I feel you.
Like where there's smoke, there's fire. It looks like, you know, it's going to be quite busy, right?
Well, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, you'll have to let us know. Well, listen, I mean, I was serious when I said that I was a little nervous at the beginning of this panel, but you guys have just been so amazing. I just love hearing about how you're all so passionate about what you do. Really eye-opening. So glad, Laura, that you brought those examples of your work and just the stories that you all brought to the table. The insights you've given me are just fantastic. This has really been a wonderful, wonderful experience for me personally. So thank you all for coming and being a part of it and sharing your time and your experiences with us. I want to thank all of you guys for tuning in. Thank my support team at Dread Central, John Condit, for doing the tech on this. This has been another episode of Dissecting Horror. We do them all the time. So check dreadcentral.com often to see what we've got going on next. Thanks again, everyone. Good night.